Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to decode one of the most wild, ultimate ancient mysteries out there. We're talking about a story that's got everything: an incredibly arrogant king, a spooky floating hand, and a fiery secret message that literally changed the course of history in a single night. Let's get right into it.
Have you ever thought you could get away with doing something wrong just because no one was watching? Come on, it's a super common human trap, right? We kind of trick ourselves into thinking that if there are no eyes on us in the physical room, well, our actions don't have consequences. Well, King Belshazzar of Babylon thought the exact same thing. He was acting like a rogue leader who thinks the rules just magically disappear the second the authorities step out of the room, completely ignoring the lessons he really should have already learned.
Section 1. The Ultimate Royal Party. Let's dive straight into the scene of the crime, starting with what was essentially the biggest, loudest, and frankly, most reckless celebration in the ancient world.
To understand why this king was so incredibly arrogant, you really have to look at his city. The fortress of Babylon seemed completely unsinkable. The source material tells us it had massive walls, these impenetrable gates made of solid brass, and it was protected by the deep waters of the Euphrates River. Because of all this crazy security, the king felt so safe, so completely untouchable, that he decided to throw a massive party instead of, actually worrying about his enemies.
And the contrast here is just crazy. On one side of the wall, you have Belshazzar showing off, getting completely intoxicated, and just giving over to his lower impulses. But right outside those seemingly impregnable walls, a massive, combined army of Medes and Persians, led by General Cyrus, was actively besieging the city, literally right on his doorstep.
Inside, Belshazzar invited a staggering 1,000 of his lords to this wild feast. And as the intoxication took over, his pride just skyrocketed. He wanted to prove that absolutely nothing was too sacred for his hands to touch. So he actually ordered his servants to bring out the sacred gold and silver cups that his grandfather had stolen from the temple in Jerusalem. Why? Just so he and his guests could disrespectfully drink wine from them while praising idols. I mean, the audacity.
Which brings us to Section 2, the spooky floating hand. The party was deafeningly loud. Princes and statesmen were drinking wine like water, just reveling in the madness. But suddenly, the music stopped. The hilarity completely vanished, and sheer, indescribable terror took over the entire room.
So who was the uninvited guest? Little did Belshazzar know there was a heavenly witness to all this idolatry. Someone, or something, crashed the king's exclusive party, proving that what our source calls the unseen watcher was paying very, very close attention to this reckless behavior.
Imagine the absolute horror of this moment. Right at the peak of the party, a bloodless hand appears out of thin air. It reaches out and starts tracing a glowing, fiery code right onto the plaster of the palace wall. The words were completely unknown to the massive crowd, but they instantly felt like a heavy portent of doom.
Belshazzar, who just moments ago was openly defying the God of heaven, was now the most terrified person in the room. His conscience violently woke up. The text actually says his joints were loosed and his knees were literally knocking together. All of that massive pride popped like a balloon in an instant. It just goes to show, when God makes men fear, they simply cannot hide their terror.
Section 3. Call in the codebreaker. So now the room is dead silent. Everyone is just staring at the wall. These fiery letters were a secret code that absolutely no one could read, and the paralyzed king was instantly desperate for a master detective to figure it out.
The king cried out in a total panic. He started offering huge rewards to anyone who could solve it. Scarlet clothes, a massive gold chain, even the position of third ruler in the entire kingdom. But all the astrologers and quote-unquote wise men completely failed. They couldn't read a single character. It wasn't until the queen mother remembered an older man named Daniel, a Hebrew captive from a former generation, that a little bit of hope appeared.
Daniel stepped right up to the terrified crowd, but he didn't offer any flattering words. Standing there in quiet dignity, he outright refused the king's bribes. He told the king to keep his rewards for someone else, proving once and for all that true heavenly wisdom cannot be bought or sold for any earthly price.
Section 4. Decoding the secret message. Daniel agreed to read the writing, for sure, but before he broke the code on the wall, he had to give the terrified king a quick but very harsh history lesson.
He reminded Belshazzar of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar.
See, Nebuchadnezzar had learned about God's immense power through some really intense suffering, and he was finally humbled. But Belshazzar? He knew all this history, yet he completely wasted his chance to be humble, choosing instead to lift himself up in arrogant rebellion against the Lord of heaven.
With that heavy history lesson delivered, Daniel finally turns to the wall and reveals the terrifying translation of those glowing words. He reads, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Mene meant God had numbered his kingdom and finished it. Peres, or Upharsin, meant the kingdom was divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
But you know, it's that middle word, tekel, that really hits the hardest. It translates to, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. God had literally weighed Belshazzar's character, and because of his extreme pride, his wasted opportunities, and his blatant rebellion, the king completely failed the test. The measure of his guilt was totally full.
Section 5. The Fall of Babylon. Those glowing words on the wall weren't just a spooky parlor trick to scare the guests. No, they were a definitive countdown to zero. The irrevocable sentence had been passed.
Even as Daniel was speaking, these momentous events were unfolding exactly as prophecy had foretold. While the nobles were inside praising their idols, Cyrus's army outside was incredibly busy. They had brilliantly diverted the Euphrates River right out of its channel. That very night, soldiers sneaked under the massive walls through the dried riverbed, marching straight into the heart of the unguarded city. The mighty kingdom of Babylon fell instantly, and Belshazzar was slain.
Section 6. Lessons for our lives. The sudden, shocking fall of Babylon and the story of the floating hand isn't just some ancient, dusty piece of history. Our source material emphasizes that it holds some major, highly practical lessons for us today about how we live and ultimately who is in control.
First off, it brilliantly illustrates why humility is so absolutely crucial. Belshazzar trusted in his own might and thought literally no one would dare question him. We really need to learn from his fatal error and never become so full of ourselves that we forget who is actually in charge. I mean, our very breath is a gift, and true wisdom starts with recognizing that.
The text also beautifully connects this to a vision of complicated, intersecting wheels guided by heavenly hands. It teaches us that God's sovereignty means He is the ultimate unseen watcher. He sits above it all, perfectly guiding the complicated play of earthly events. So even when the politics and strife of nations seem utterly chaotic to us, there is an overruling power constantly at work.
So, drawing from all of this, here are 3 massive takeaways from this explainer that you can apply to your daily life. Number 1, choose humility over arrogance. Number 2, actively learn from the mistakes of those who came before you. Please, don't waste your opportunities like Belshazzar did. And number 3, always remember that the unseen watcher is paying attention, so live with integrity, especially when you think you're alone.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on as you go about your day. Knowing that the unseen watcher sees absolutely everything, how will you consciously practice humility today? Whatever you do, don't wait for the fiery writing on the wall to finally learn your lesson.